Good morning to all my dear students. Welcome to Digital Learning, the Department of Perquisites Education. Here myself P.RANGANAYAKULU, Assistant Professor of Commerce. And the paper Income Tax 1. And here the topic the fully taxable perquisites. And the objective of the learning is to study and understand the taxable perquisites. And the session outcome, the students will be able to know the list of taxable perquisites. In the earlier session ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸೆಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಎಕ್ಸೆಂಪ್ಟೆಡ್ ಪರ್ಕ್ವಿಸಿಟ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಈಗ ಈ ಒಂದು ಸೆಷನ್ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ನಾವು ವಾಟ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಬಲ್ ಪರ್ಕ್ವಿಸಿಟ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ಕಮ್ ಟು ನೋ the perquisites. So here the taxable perquisites are the following perquisites are taxable to all the employees. Number 1, the rent free accommodation. Number 2, accommodation at concessional rent. And whereas number 3, obligation of employee paid by the employer. And these are all the 3 that is taxable perquisites. And here number 1 is value of residential accommodation provided to the assessee by his employer, that is called as rent free accommodation. Here the furnished accommodation and unfurnished accommodation, there will be 2 types of accommodations. Number 1, rent free unfurnished accommodation owned by the employer. So license fee determined by the government in accordance with the rules framed by the government for allotment of residence. So here the license fee, whatever it is determined by the government in accordance with the rules which is framed by the government for the allotment of the residence, is the value of perquisites. So next, value of residential accommodation provided to the assessee by his employer, that is private sector employees or other employees. Accommodation owned by the employer. Suppose if there is a own accommodation by the employer, and if that accommodation is provided to the employees, and if the employees are working in the private sector, and for those the 15% of the salary in case of cities having population exceeding 25 lakhs, and here in 10% of salary is to be considered in the cities having population exceeding 10 lakhs but not exceeding 25 lakhs, and the 7.5% of the salary is to be considered in any other place. ಅಂದರೆ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ನಾವು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ನಾವು ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ 15% ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿ ಮತ್ತು 10% ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿ ಮತ್ತು 7% ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಅಂದ್ರೆ 15% ಆಫ್ ದ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿ ಯಾವಾಗ ನಾವು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ದ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ in the cities having the population exceeding 25 lakhs. Suppose if the employees are working in the cities and having the more than 25 lakhs population idre alli na 15% of the salary tagobeku, and the employees working in the cities having the population more than 10 lakhs and less than 25 lakhs population idre alli ನಾವು 10% of salary ತಗೋ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. and suppose less than 10 lakhs population ಇದ್ರೆ ನಾವು 7.5% of salary ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. and if the accommodation is taken on lease, suppose for the employer ಗೆ own accommodation ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರೋಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ if any accommodation is provided by the employer to the employees on lease or rent basis ಆದರೆ actual amount of lease or rent payable by the employer or 15% of salary whichever is less. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಎರಡನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ನಂಬರ್ 1 ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು actual amount of lease or rent paid by the employer or 15% of salary whichever is less is to the value of unfurnished accommodation. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ಗೆ. ಸಪೋಸ್ ಅದು ಅನ್ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ಗೆ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ಪರ್ಕ್ವಿಸಿಟ್ಸ್. ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಇದು ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಆದರೆ ನಾವು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಅನ್ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಏನು ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತೀವೋ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ನಾವು ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಅದು 15% ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿನ ಅಥವಾ 10% ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿನ ಅಥವಾ 7.5% ಆಫ್ ದ ಸ್ಯಾಲರಿನ. ಸಪೋಸ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯರ್ ಈಸ್ ಪ್ರೊವೈಡೆಡ್ ಆನ್ ಲೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಬೇಸಿಸ್ ಆದರೆ ಅದು ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ 15% of salary or the actual amount of lease or rent whichever is less ನಾವು ತಗೊಳ್ತೀವಿ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನು ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ಗೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಆದರೆ ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಆದರೆ 10% ಪರ್ ಆ್ಯನಮ್ ಆನ್ ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಫರ್ನಿಚರ್ ಏನಿರುತ್ತೋ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಆ್ಯಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ದಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿಕಮ್ ದಿ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ accommodation. In case suppose if there is no own furniture adre, suppose if the furniture is provided by the employer to the employee on hire basis adre, the actual hire charges of furniture paid by the employer, hire charges which are paid by the employer for the furniture, that will be added to the value of rent free unfurnished accommodation. Then we will get the value of rent free furnished accommodation. Next, accommodation provided in hotel. Suppose if the employer is provided some accommodations to the employees in the hotels at the time, under what circumstances the employer provided the accommodation for the employees in the hotels. Number one, on transfer. Suppose if the employees are transferred from one place to the another place, at the time the employer will be provided the accommodation. Avaga on transfer adre up to 15 days value is nil. Andre so the up to 15 days whatever the facility that is provided by the employer is taken as a nil. In the other cases, that is 20% of 24% of the salary or actual charges paid to the hotel, whichever is less is the value of perquisites, it is taxable. Next, accommodation at the time of transfer in two places up to 90 days. Up to 90 days, any one accommodation having lower value is taxable. So they will take into consideration the 90 days, and up to 90 days any one accommodation having lower value is taxable. After 90 days both the accommodation is taxable. So that is ಈಗ ಎರಡು ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಎರಡು ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದಾಗ ಅವರು ಲೆಸ್ ದ್ಯಾನ್ ಅಪ್ ಟು 90 ಡೇಸ್ ಎನಿ ಒನ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಹ್ಯಾವಿಂಗ್ ಲೋಯರ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಎಷ್ಟಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಚಾರ್ಜ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಹೋಟೆಲ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ. 90 ಡೇಸ್ ತನಕ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಎರಡು ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ 90 ಡೇಸ್ ಯಾವುದು ಕಡಿಮೆ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಇರುತ್ತೋ ಅದನ್ನ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಫ್ಟರ್ 90 ಡೇಸ್ ಆದ್ರೆ ಎರಡೂ ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ನಾವು ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಬಲ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಅಟ್ ಕನ್ಸೆಷನಲ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಅಂತಂದಾಗ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಸ್ ಪರ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ನಾವು ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಅರ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಸ್ಲೈಡ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ವಿ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನಾವು ರೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದೇಳಿ, ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಹೇಗೆ ಅನ್ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂತಂದೇಳಿ. ಆ ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಅಥವಾ ಅನ್ಫರ್ನಿಶ್ಡ್ ಏನು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಫ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಫ್ರೀ ಅಕಾಮಿಡೇಷನ್ ನಾವು ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತೀವಿ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಲೆಸ್ ರೆಂಟ್ ಪೇಡ್ ಬೈ ದಿ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯಿ. ಸಪೋಸ್ ಇಫ್ ಎನಿ ರೆಂಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಡಕ್ಟೆಡ್ ಬೈ ದಿ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯರ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದಿ ಸ್ಯಾಲರೀಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್, it will be deducted. The remaining is called as the taxable value of perquisites. So here, if the employee is provided with a hotel accommodation in exceeding 15 days, the taxable value is 24% of the salary or higher charges payable by the employer, whichever is lower. Next, personal obligation of employees met by the employer. What are the personal obligations? What will be the personal obligations of the employees? Let us see with this list. The following are the obligation of the employee paid by the employer. Number one, life insurance premium paid by the employer on behalf of the employee. Is any life insurance premium, if it is paid by the employer to the employees, and that is one of the personal obligation. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ಇನ್ಸೂರೆನ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರೀಮಿಯಂ, ಲೈಫ್ ಇನ್ಸೂರೆನ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರೀಮಿಯಮ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯರ್ ಪೇ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯಿಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಒನ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಆಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಷನಲ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್ paid by the employer. Suppose any income tax or professional tax, if it is paid by the employer to the employee on behalf of the employees, it is also one of the personal obligation. In addition to that, there are some other personal obligation, that is gas bill, electricity bill or water bill, etc. of the employee paid by the employer. Suppose any gas bill ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, electricity bill ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು ಮತ್ತು water bill ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, if it is paid by the employer on behalf of the employee, it is also personal obligation. Next, domestic servants appointed by the employee but a salary of them paid by the employer. Suppose if any domestic servants, that is gardener, watchman, cook, they are called as the domestic servants. If they are appointed by the employee and whereas the salaries are paid by the employer, that is also one of the personal obligations. Next, reimbursement of employees children's school or college fees. Suppose if any school fees or college fees is paid by the employee and that if it is reimbursed by the employer, that is also one of the perquisites, that is all called as a personal obligations. So these are all called as the personal obligations of the employer on behalf of the employee. These are all the taxable perquisites. So thank you for watching this video.